Welcome to Tuesday. It's December 30th, 2025. Your DayWeather Podcast brought to you by the Advocates Injury Attorneys. If you've been injured in an accident, do not face it alone. Get an experienced local Wyoming attorney on your side. Free consultations at WyomingAdvocates.com or call 307-800-1952. You deserve an advocate. Well, it's block day 26. I went back and I looked at the weather charts going all the way back to late November and early December. Really, the block began to form right around the time we had that first bigger Arctic outbreak get further into the western United States right at the beginning of December. So if you think it's been a while since we've been in this pattern, you're right. You're not being deceived. High pressure overall, though, will bring quiet weather today and tomorrow. Now, as we get to New Year's Day, Thursday, into Friday, Pacific moisture will reach the West Coast, and some of it will get to areas along and west of the Continental Divide. So if you're in the mountains or along and west of the Divide, by Thursday into Friday, and maybe also into the weekend, you're going to get a little bit of weather, not a lot, but a little bit. East of the Continental Divide, it's still going to be a struggle. Now, on our block watch, could something happen with the blocking pattern next week? Maybe. We'll show you what we see, and whether or not it develops, we'll just have to wait. Here's a beautiful shot of a beautiful cap cloud there over the Grand Teton on the west side of the Grand Tetons from Dan there in Driggs. What's even better about a shot like that? Well, another shot, but from the other side of the Grand Tetons on the Jackson side. So just a beautiful shot there of the wind currents coming over the Grand Teton, causing just enough lift to form a cloud. And when the wind pattern tends to be stable and you have a little bit of stability in the atmosphere, which we do in this high pressure, you'll get a situation like that. Beautiful blue skies and a big moon there over Fort Laramie. And what's better than a stake and rider fence across the west? Now, you've seen a lot of pictures here of a lot of blue sky, and that's how things are going to be. As a lot of the west, there's really not a lot going on again. Notice out here in the Pacific, we have got a lot of moisture again. And again, it's coming up from the lower latitudes, the subtropics, so there's a good moisture flow. And here's the next low coming in out of the Gulf of Alaska. That's going to dive slowly south, come in, and then come into the California coast. Very, very similar to what happened last week. It's just that it's just not as intense of a storm, but precipitation totals, as you'll see here in a moment, will be very impressive again for California and parts of the desert Southwest. While the middle part of the country is going to be very quiet, the Arctic air is headed into New England, the Great Lakes, and eastern areas of Canada. And there you can see that. The 500 millibar chart shows that big low in the Gulf of Alaska, this upper level low here spinning around, bringing up that moisture from the lower latitudes north towards California again. Very unique pattern that we're seeing here in California. With these blocks and the fact that we do have a weak La Nina in place. You just wouldn't expect those kind of storm systems. But we've had nothing usual about what's going on here over the last 4 weeks. There's the big Greenland block. This is big, going all the way across the Atlantic before the jet stream dive bombs, bringing a shot of cold and snow into Europe. So this high pressure ridge is just going to be dominant before this low comes in. And you can see the warmth pushing in from the Pacific, getting all the way into the Dakotas. Temperature anomalies here today, like this, is again, it's the Pacific dominating the weather pattern in the west, just like it's done for the last 26 days. And then you can see where the real cold is. The real cold is from Alaska through the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and then temperature anomalies go all the way into eastern Mexico. And then you can see the warmth relative to normal. This doesn't mean Greenland is warm. It's still very cold, but it's warmer than the 30-year average. So you can definitely see where the blocking patterns are making a really big difference. Then as we get into New Year's Day, the low starts its movement to the southwest, again, paralleling the coast. Now we do have a little bit of that moisture from the lower latitudes in the Pacific getting pushed into California New Year's Day, and then some of this does push into the Great Basin states, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, then into western Wyoming, western areas of Colorado. We'll get a little precipitation. We still have the big Greenland block up here. This the classic omega shape like that. So this is log jamming. This big low here in eastern Canada. That's why this low is going to retrograde to the southwest instead of coming in. So here we go again. It's as Yogi Berra would say, it's deja vu all over again. And as we get into the weekend, notice a subtle shift eastward. So we do start to see more in the way of the West Coast low wanting to push east. The block up here continues. However, notice up here in the Aleutians, we don't have the high sitting there now. It's getting pushed a little bit more down to the south. This is the hint of what may happen next week. So we'll continue to see a feed of moisture into the weekend, into the West Coast, and little bits and pieces of moisture will come off the West Coast and in, producing a little bit of weather, mainly over the higher terrain. But still, you're not going to get cold in this type of pattern whatsoever. The Arctic air will again be locked up. So if you look at precipitation chances through Friday, this is through Friday afternoon. You can see some good rains again for Southern California, the Sierra Nevada into Arizona. Las Vegas gets rained on again, and nothing really to write home about, but there is going to be a little bit of snow returning to parts of the central and northern Rockies and the Pacific Northwest, overrunning precipitation as that Pacific moisture crosses the plains and doesn't do anything, but when it hits the Arctic boundary, turns into clouds and snow. And again, the perpetual dry slot out here in the plains and east of the Continental Divide continues. Now, as we look ahead and go into the snowfall totals, looks like this. Like the last storm, snow totals are fairly high. When we take a look at next week's weather, this is Tuesday of next week. The low off of California still is there. However, when we look at the higher latitudes, we've got the block here, the Greenland block, but it's shifting east a little bit. We also have a low heading towards the Aleutians where the high pressure ridge has been dominant, or the block. So right around January 6th, the Greenland block is a little bit weaker, shifts a little bit more east. The Aleutians block is weakening, is getting beat down by this high pressure ridge a little bit. But we're still stalling out with this low along the West Coast even into early next week. But things are getting reconfigured up here. So when we take a look at the hemispheric pattern by next Tuesday, you can see how things are looking a little bit differently. The tilt of the Greenland block, it ends up with a little bit of a tilt there. That's why it's shifting east, so you can see Greenland gets cold again. Then we do not have the classic omega pattern here in the Aleutians anymore. Yes, there's a subtle little high pressure ridge here, but we're starting to see a more vigorous jet stream flow being less interrupted by the big block like this. So could this mean by Tuesday of next week that the block is going to break down, or at least be in a weakened state, and we should immediately see a big change in the weather? No, it's a process. So once you start to break the block down or have it shift, there's going to be a lull. You've got to let things happen. But if we do see a more straight line jet stream wind, that's going to allow more energy to come into the west. That's going to allow more cold to be able to come out of Canada once the block is removed and or weakens and shifts. And if we go into, this is Tuesday, if we go into Thursday, look what happens in 2 days. There's no longer the block in the Aleutians. It's gone. The block is much weaker in Greenland. And notice we have these waves. These waves start showing up. They're more frequent across the northern hemisphere. That's another sign of the blocking patterns easing up and allowing more systems to form and move through. What this means is it's going to be another full week of the block. So we're going to go into block day 33, 34. Then after that, things change. And here's another way to look at it. Instead of looking at the northern hemisphere, if we just look at the North Pacific by the 8th of January, you can see no more block. It's gone. That doesn't mean it won't come back. It could very well come back. But it's going to get erased or at least significantly dampened. And if you notice, the model says, all right, we're going to bring something in by late next week. That's going to be colder and more wet and further inland and out in the North Atlantic. This is for the same time period. Here's Greenland up here, and Greenland is not under a high anymore. That high has shifted more over towards Western Europe. So, hurry up and wait is the motto for today. Have yourself a good Tuesday. We'll see you tomorrow.